Hello, everyone. Crowded space to talk about regulation. I'm actually surprised, to be super honest. So
Amazing.
definitely is a topic that everyone has in their mind. We all know that AI is now kind of who is not using it on a minute basis overall as the topic of the year. It's the most profound technology that humanity is working on today. A technology with great potential, but of course, how do we regulate this technology is also in everyone's head. And for example, I work for Google, and Sundar Pichai, our CEO, said during his recent visit to Europe that AI is too important not to regulate, and too important not to regulate well. Now, what does that mean? Startups are key to solving the world's biggest challenges, and here we are with many of those. And AI actually can be their sharpest tool to actually tackle some of the world's biggest concerns. And as we were saying, we're in the middle of the discussions in Europe about the future AI Act that our panelists will share a little bit more about. A regulation that holds immense significance in shaping actually the trajectory of artificial intelligence, development, and its impact in society. We're going to talk more because they're considering a risk-based approach. So I would like for you to share a little bit more about this, and also try to see what are going to be the implications for startups. The implications on a positive way, but also the challenges that they will face. As we were saying, in terms of implications and the positive ones, of course, we need some kind of framework, clarity on how their startups will have to operate, and transparency and accountability. But also is what is going to be the resources, the implications, the challenges the startups will have to face to be compliant with those. Let me share some data, and we'll jump into the questions. So according to the AI Act Impact Survey, 65 of all startups said that they were familiarized with the AI Act. How many of you actually know the AI Act? Have you really gone deep in understanding how it's the Commission's approach? Raise your hand. Okay, so yeah, not very accurate. Nearly 50% of the respondents would classify their AI system as high-risk system. And 45% of the surveyed startups consider their AI system to be GPAI, which is general purpose AI, making them subject to some of the obligations for general purpose AI providers. But let's jump into actually the specifics on, could maybe you, Alberto, give you a 2 minutes super brief on what is the proposed approach now from the Commission that will soon start on trilogues? What is the Commission today proposal to the AI Act?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I can do that very quickly. First of all, just to let you know that the European Union has been working on AI development of ethical AI since 2018 with a high-level expert group that developed recommendations. Those recommendations were put into a white paper that was published in 2020 with the new Commission. And after that, the Commission in 2021 proposed a regulation for artificial intelligence, which is a regulation that doesn't regulate the technology itself, but it regulates the applications of that technology that may affect fundamental rights of citizens. So the approach of the Commission is a balanced approach between ensuring that we can still innovate with the production of artificial intelligence when it doesn't affect fundamental rights. But when it does affect fundamental rights, we put the necessary safeguards or the guardrails to ensure that citizens are protected against, for example, discriminatory decisions that are taken by an artificial intelligence system because the data is biased, or by potential problems to the privacy of your data, which are fundamental rights that we all enjoy in the European Union. That was a proposal by the European Commission that I don't know if you guys understand how we legislate at the European Union, but the Commission proposes something, and then it goes to the Council, where we are member states debating how to change that proposal in line with our position. For example, Spain was one of the countries that included the necessity early, before ChatGPT outbreak, to talk about general purpose AI, to see whether we need to set up a number of minimum obligations for general purpose that then will become high-risk AI systems. At the same time, the Council, where the member states are represented, has its own position. The European Parliament does the same process in the committees, and they agree on a position. So at the moment, we have a definite position on the Council, and the European Parliament is going to vote their final position on the 14th of June. So next week on Wednesday, right? So that we can start trilogues. The first trilogue, as established by the European presidency, which is now held by the Swedish colleagues, will take place on the very 14th at night. So we are really ready to start discussing what are the consensus or the compromises between the two positions, so that we get to a final text, which is basically a consensus view of the Parliament and the Council, with always the help of the Commission.
Okay. So, I mean, I think this was key to get kind of the audience to understand, because I think one of the key questions that Justo and I were discussing is like, to what extent is as we're here at South Summit, kind of in the heart of the startup ecosystem, to what extent is the ecosystem aware of what Alberto was just sharing, and the implications, and also to what extent the institutions are considering startups as part of creators or enablers or developers of AI?
You've seen the answer here, I think. I think the ecosystem in general is not cognizant on the evolution and the work that is being done. Of course, there's some bigger startups, scale-ups that already have the resources and the staff and the team, and I'm working already on that. There can be some other startups that are already regulated, and they already know what are the steps towards, in this case, the AI Act. But in general, I would say that first, startups, and I've been an entrepreneur myself, typically don't have the resources, and that means since you don't have the resources, you don't have the will to actually worry about regulation until it's probably too late in some cases. We saw that with GDPR. Okay, suddenly we had to implement GDPR because we weren't sure as a startups whether that was for us or not, and then we realized it was for us. And I think this is another challenge we have now with the AI Act. The technology goes very quickly, so it's kind of, as Alberto was saying, the first draft of the AI Act didn't take into account generative AI because it didn't exist as a concept. It existed in the state of the art, but not as a concept for startups. And then regulation is going to have to adapt to everything that is going to happen with the technology. That's very difficult for startups to manage in the day-to-day basis, when most of us, what we are thinking when we have a startup is to reach the end of the month. So when the regulation comes, okay, will come. But in this case, this is too important to act this way. We need to understand the implications of what a high risk, as probably you will explain later, high risk AI system implies for a startup and for bigger companies as well, but in this forum for startups as well.
Yeah, and actually follow up, maybe for both, maybe Justo can give us more specific examples on startups, but you can definitely kind of applicate it for corporates or other uses. But how are startups in Spain or companies using, you talked about general purpose, like what is this, and what would fall into high risk, low risk? No, so it's setting maybe some examples.
Yeah, so I think most, or many startups, I wouldn't say most, but many startups are definitely using or augmenting general purpose AIs. I won't get technical here, but there's things like transfer learning, which, I'm sorry for technical guys here, I will try. It's kind of reusing pre-trained models, for example, in order to create an AI system much faster. So for that, and of course the usage of generative AIs, either commercial or open source, are something that many startups are starting to grow to at a point. For me, the critical thing is that according to all the surveys in the last months, more than what we thought, more startups than what we thought, think that they would become, but they would belong to an AI high-risk system. Okay, I think there was a survey saying that it's about 33%, 35% of the startups think that their AI system would be put as a high-risk system, which represents lots of costs, potential costs, up to $300,000 for some other forecasts. So that's the critical thing here for me. There are startups that are doing that. I can put some specific examples later if you want, but there are startups that are using general-purpose AI systems that are creating generative AIs that may believe that since I'm not in health or I'm not in high critical infrastructures, that's not for me. But just to put a very simple example, for a few years, I've worked in the talent and employment world. That's one of the high-risk areas according to the AI Act. So any startup that is now trying to create, for example, to match profiles, user profiles with job postings, or is trying to automate the candidate management in a job posting position, may be in a high-risk system, in a high-risk level in the AI Act. This is what we have to think about and to provide more information to startups about what to do with it.
Yeah.
No, indeed. Let me add as well here. I mean, there is 4 categories. So there's the prohibited practices, like for example, what happens in China, which is social scoring, that is prohibited in the AI Act. And then there's the high risk. And the high risk in the regulation, there is an annex that lists, I believe it's 13 categories or sectors where potentially your AI system could be a high risk. One of the aspects is employment. Another one, for example, is education. Another one could be insurance. Another one could be things related to health when you are maybe, the AI system is going to check whether you have a cancer cell or not. And then there is the rest of AI systems that they have, where we ask that there is sufficient transparency that you are using an AI system on this. So there is a human oversight if it's necessary because it affects certain aspects. And with this, I understand that when you have to comply with regulation, that has a cost for big companies. Usually, big companies, it's easier for them to adapt than small and medium enterprises. But both the position of the Parliament and the position of the Council, they also foresee a number of extra, let's say, not obligations, but extra dispositions that relate to SMEs. So, for example, fines for SMEs will be a bit lower than for big companies. There is an obligation on member states to ensure that they do awareness raising between SMEs and startups so that they understand where they are. And there is one thing very important in this regulation, which is the proposal to put forward sandboxes for innovation. So every member state is set to put sandboxes so that their innovation ecosystem can go through that sandbox in order to develop AI systems that are compliant with the regulation, so that we ensure that we don't stop innovation and we provide the tools for innovators to go ahead with their business.
Yeah, I'll jump straight to actually we had it on the what exactly, because actually this is going to be especially relevant for Spain and for during the presidency, because Spain is going to be kind of launching this first sandbox. Yeah. Can you explain to the audience a little bit what's the way to interact with those sandbox? And also, you were talking about what Breton has proposed, the AI Pact. Like, what are the next steps, to be honest, that are going to be relevant for Spain? Okay, well, the sandbox that Spain is developing is not the type of sandboxes that the regulation establishes. It's another type of sandbox because so what you made reference to with the GDPR, we all experienced that drama, that how do we implement the data protection impact assessment, what is a data minimization principle. All that happened for 2 years until everyone understood how we have to comply with this. The Secretary of State saw this as a clear opportunity in order to create a sandbox that would develop implementation guidelines of the principles of the high-risk AI systems that are contained in the regulation, so that SMEs, startups, they have operational guidelines to be able to comply with each of the principles that the regulation contains. So it's a completely different approach. It's a way to test
whether we can implement the regulation or not, and if we cannot, what are the tools that we need to put in motion so that people have it easy to comply with the regulation, and we reduce the compliance cost as much as possible, especially for SMEs.
And I think that's critical for startups. I mean, in this forum, because if you read the AI Act, there's so many questions about, the fines that I see here, do they apply to the startup or do they apply to the big company? So this pre-regulation sandbox that enables us to test the system with AI startups that are willing to go to the sandbox in order to talk to the Commission, to the European Union, in order to understand and make the final changes before the act is ready, and then the post-publication of the law, so that basically Sandbox becomes a place where you can see if there's compliance before you launch your project to the market. I think it's one of the critical aspects in this brand new arena that we're in.
Yeah, because what do you see that are going to be kind of the implications? Kind of you taking maybe the representation of startups and you maybe taking the representation of government, kind of, is there a conversation? Like I know it's startups at the end of the day remain a niche and remain kind of a small part of our economy, so what do you think are going to be the implications of this AI Act on innovation, kind of on that, and is the government kind of seeing on how do we balance, no? How do we balance innovation, competitiveness with, of course, safety, privacy, and all this crucial topics for us?
I think you just said it. For me, and I think we are all going to be very heavy on that, is the balance between competitiveness and the defense of the fundamental rights. I think there's some pros and cons. For instance, I have some notes here. So the increased regulatory compliance, if we're able to fully define what exactly a high-risk AI system is, if we're able to put some levels, so for example, a startup that participates with our AI model in a high-risk AI system, but in a minimum way, has the same implications as a bigger involvement in that high-risk AI system. If we're able to define that more closely, I think the increased regulatory compliance is fine, because then we will all agree, or mostly agree, that this is definitely a high-risk system. Mm-hmm. And a high-risk system must be regulated so that we are all safe as citizens and with the companies. The ethical and transparency aspects that Alberto mentioned are critical for me. And also the global impact that the European Union can have if we're able together to have something that actually works, mm-hmm. or somehow works, and in a selfish way. I mean, if as happened with the GDPR, if the California law is similar, the AI Act in the California law is similar to the European one, it's going to be easier for Spanish and European startups to actually go to other places. The cons that I see, and I think they're quite obvious. First, we need to know the costs of this. What are the challenges that we have if we don't comply? You mentioned, okay, the penalties will be lower. We need to have some more information about that. And then I would differentiate between the law as it is written, as it will be written hopefully at the end of the year or whatever, and how it will be implemented by the different countries. The fragmentation of the implementation, we already suffer as Europeans this fragmentation. If we have another act that is so critical for startups that still increases the fragmentation, that's going to be also a big challenge for us.
Yeah, I mean, on the side of governments, I think we need to talk more. Startups might be a niche of the economy, but SMEs are 99% of the European economy and the Spanish economy. So it's important for us to provide you with the tools that you understand how to comply with regulation. That's why we put the sandbox in motion. It's important that we provide with assessment, with awareness raising and all that, and it's something that it's included in the regulation. But one thing we need to also take a step back, and regulation may also mean innovation. So, for example, when the GDPR entered into force, a lot of startups created what is called personal management information systems, and this was created because we gave the right to citizens to control their data and to be able to share their data with whom they want, but they needed the physical infrastructure or the application to do so, and this has created a new business. And in fact, in the survey that you mentioned, there was a lot of startups that said that we would go abroad. Let me tell you that this is not an issue only of the European Union, but the US is thinking to regulate as well. There is a process as well in the White House to talk to companies to see whether we need to regulate in sectors or not, whether there has to be a federal agency to deal with AI or not. China is also regulating for other reasons, not for protecting fundamental rights, obviously. But I mean, the whole world is thinking that we cannot let the technology go, because this can have implications in our democracies, in our human rights, in our physical even existence that needs to be contained. So this is happening. For example, last week, the European Union and the US got together in Sweden for the Trade and Technology Council, where they agreed to start talking about a code of conduct for generative AI. Before you mentioned Breton, he's proposing an AI pact so that we provide solutions or tools or something so that companies can start complying with the regulation even before it enters into force. Because once there is an adoption by the Council and the Parliament, there is usually a period of 2 years for companies and for everyone to adapt to the new regulation. No? So these conversations are global, and we cannot expect that if you go to another place, you will not face a regulation. There will be something. And let me also mention that GDPR set an international standard for data protection. That is now, many big companies are using that standard in order to apply it everywhere. With the AI, it will be the same. It doesn't matter where you produce your AI system. If you sell it in, or you use it or deploy it in the EU, you will need to comply with the regulation as well. So are you ready to give up to a 500 million people market? I don't know, but maybe it's better to be ahead of the curve, be as ready as possible, and then put it everywhere, because with the AI will be another international standard, I think, for thanks to the European Union action.
Yeah, we definitely also foresee that startups that actually also prioritize ethical and compliance will also get the trust of their users and investors, of course, no? But I think it's more the moment that we're leaving, no? The uncertainties and how to regulate, as you were saying, kind of, it's 3 years, 4 years. I mean, how long has it been while the innovation is rushing? No, it's just changing on a daily basis. No, how do we balance this timings? No, for the innovation.
Sophie, if I may add, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the act is approved at the end of the year or whatever doesn't mean that it's going to be active, sorry for the lack of technical term, until 18?
Entry into force, there is a period of 3 years or 2 years, depending on which position. The Council says 3 years, and the
exactly, which is why this is so critical. What's going to happen with AI in 3 years? The law must be done in a way that is flexible enough to accommodate to everything that is happening right now. I mean, whoever of you that are working with AI know that it's almost impossible to know everything that is going on in the technical and regulatory matter every day. So we need to be ready for that. And the self-regulation, I think, is one very good way for bigger companies, but also for startups, to actually start to take a look at this and say, am I ready? Do I need help? Or do I need to push and to talk to the government for help?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, startups in the audience, what should they be doing if they're leveraging AI or developing an AI? What would be your recommendation at this point?
Well, my recommendation is to be up to date with how the regulation is progressing. I would say so the sandbox that we are developing, we welcome startups that they are developing their AI system to come into our sandbox. So when we publish the call, I would encourage you, if you are developing a high-risk AI system, to come into the sandbox, and then we can work together with the operational guidelines on how to make sure that this is compliant. And I would say it's pretty much that. I mean, it's also important that we gather in this type of settings as well, that we are able to explain to you from the public sector what this entails for you, and that you tell us as well. I mean, now it's a bit too late in the process to tell us for changes, but it's important because, I mean, every law is revised every 5 years. or well, I don't know exactly now how many years is the AI Act, but every 5 years there's a revision, or there is an analysis whether it's still realistic or viable to keep using the same obligations or not. So that is important that SMEs, startups are engaged in the process.
Yeah, you're saying it's too late, but if I understood also the trilogues, kind of this discussion between the three institutions is just about to start. What is the position of Spain, as Spain is also going to have such a leading role, no, in the months ahead? So
the trilogues is basically a negotiation between the limits of one position and the other position. So we cannot go farther away from that. Spain, as presidency, we are supposed to be neutral brokers to ensure that there is a consensus, and we get to a consensus. To be honest with you, there is only 5 points in the regulation that are actually controversial, where we need to negotiate a lot. But in principle, both positions are very close to each other. So we will need to, I think it's just resolving at political level those 5 points that are a bit more controversial, like, for example, remote identification and biometric identification in public spaces, which is one of the prohibitions, or more or less, that exist, and also the scope and other aspects, for example, related to general purpose AI or foundational models, because there is the two aspects in the regulation, and that's basically our role, and we are committed to do as much as possible to ensure that this is approved as soon as possible, because we all need this legal certainty. We cannot be for ages discussing on negotiation and stuff.
And Justo, as representative of the startup ecosystem here today, which will be the petitions or the comments or the from the industry in this phase that we're entering?
I think we've mentioned some of them already, but first, and just to continue with the Filipe's answer, I think startups, the same way that in GDPR we had to start with privacy by design, we had to build our products with privacy by design. Now we have to build our AI products with risk by design, and I think that's good. With that, we need those regulatory sandboxes, and we need them as soon as possible in order to be able to test and to try and to see if our AI systems are high risk or not. We need guidelines. You mentioned the operational guidelines, and I think they're critical. If I put my entrepreneur hat and I read the 144 pages with the latest amendments, it's very difficult to know actually what a startup is being asked against what Google or Meta or other big companies are being asked. And I would, again, and let me repeat, I would request these clear guidelines also for the implementation in different countries in order to disable potential problems with fragmentation. I think those are, there are probably many more, but those are the 3 key areas that startups need to request and work with the government.
Cool. And we're finalizing. So the motto of South Summit this year is today 2030, and as fast the things are going. So how do you foresee 2030 in terms of the regulatory environment for AI?
You start.
Good question. Let me be optimist, okay? Because if we're able to solve some of the issues with the AI Act in terms of flexibility, the definition of the high-risk system, the definition of substantial modifications to the AI system, so that people or startups who already are compliant know very exactly when they might not be compliant in the future. I think we're in a great moment to create a regulation that is fair enough, that actually enables to control the really, really high-risk system, but that is at the end of the day the 5-10% of the total system, so that the rest. The rest of, you don't like the answer. So that the rest of the companies, the 90% of the AI systems that are not going to be high risk, they can be very safe, knowing that they can continue working, they can try to have the best business that they have. That at the end of the day is what startups want to have. I'm very optimistic for that, but we have to work together.
And Alberto, from your point of view?
Well, I would say that by 2030, the AI standard that the European Union has set will be applicable everywhere, I believe, as I said before. So I think it will be good, because we will ensure that you guys can continue to innovate through sandboxes, through other areas, and maybe not focusing so much on high risk, if that's the case. And if you focus on high risk, you have legal certainty on how to do it in a way that protects citizens. And I would say that's a nice
That's a good vision.
future
Yeah.
for the EU and for us.
Good. Well, thank you so much. And thank you
Thank
to
you.
the audience. And let's make sure you follow what's happening because it's going to be tremendously relevant for all of us and especially for you, the innovators. So thank you so much.